This is your 10-minute warning. Big Ten TED Live starts in 10 minutes. Welcome, Big Ten fans. This is Big Ten Ted Live. Man, oh man, what a time to be a Big Ten fan. You know what it is. It is Big Ten Ted Live coming to you on a Sunday night here from the Big Ten Ted Studios. We got a lot to talk about tonight, don't we? We've got new coaches in the Big Ten West. We've got a Big Ten championship game that we're going to talk about. A little sneak peek. We've got Michigan representing the East Division. We've got the Purdue Boilermakers representing the West Division. Wow. That West Division was crazy, absolutely crazy down the stretch, of course, with the Iowa Hawkeyes, which seems like a long time ago, that Friday night game in which Nebraska held on against Iowa. That seems like a long time ago, especially with what happened Saturday in the noon slot with Michigan taking it to Ohio State for the second consecutive year. Like, there's beating Ohio State. And then there's what they did last year and then what they did this year, especially the second half in both of those games. So we've got coaches, we've got Big Ten championship. I'm going to talk about my Big Ten surprises of the year on the football field. So we'll get to that because, you know, there's a lot of things. You talk about injuries, you talk about tunnel interactions, unexpected things that happen during a Big Ten season. Okay, and I want to talk about my Big Ten surprises of the year because there were some that were surprising, and then there were some things that weren't so surprising. So, little housework to take care of here before we get into the content. If you haven't already, subscribe. Big Ten content every single day, whether it's polls to vote on, whether it's pick'ems, gonna have some basketball pick'ems coming up here, whether it's videos, Big Ten content for the Big Ten fan every single day here on YouTube. If you don't already, follow on Twitter at Big Ten Ted over there on Twitter. And you can support the channel with a super chat. There's, guys, you see already a lot of comments coming in, so you can make sure your super chat is seen and responded to by the super chat down below the live chat as well. So I want to give a couple of shout outs before we get into the football talk. I want to give a big time shout out to Wisconsin Badger Volleyball, their fourth consecutive Big Ten title on the court. They have won 6 of 7 sets this season against a top 5 Nebraska team. Danielle Hart, Sarah Franklin, they're doing it. They're doing a great job at Badger Volleyball, and that's impressive considering how deep Big Ten Volleyball has been. 4 Big Ten teams in the top 10 right now: Wisconsin, Nebraska, Ohio State, and Minnesota. And I think Penn State notches in at about 11 back there as well. Man, that is a deep league. So I want to send a shout out to Wisconsin Volleyball. 4 straight Big Ten championships. Also, how about Purdue basketball today? What a weekend. If you are a Purdue Boilermaker fan, the party has already started in West Lafayette or wherever you call home, because Friday they beat Gonzaga on the court. Saturday they clinch a Big Ten West championship. Today, Sunday, beat Duke by 20, was it? 20-something points. Maybe the best weekend ever in Purdue Boilermaker history. Wow. What a weekend they had for all the black and gold fans with Purdue. What a weekend. Going to quickly here get to some comments because they are rolling in. A lot of talk about Ohio State and Michigan. A lot of talk about daddies. What's up, Buckeyes? Here as well as we continue to go, and it has been a super day. We're going to be talking about those coaches. I know you're probably going to want to talk about coaches. RHULE to Nebraska, Luke Fickell on his way to Madison, Wisconsin. So we will get to that as well. I want to start first. I want to talk about Michigan and Ohio State this weekend. And man, if you would have told me coming into the game, Blake Corum's not going to be able to go, he had one carry, and then that was pretty much it in that football game. I really thought Ohio State would be the team that would win this game if Blake Corum isn't able to go. But this Michigan team showed me, I think, a lot of things. And now you're focused. Purdue, I think they're going to roll pretty well over the Boilermakers. I'll have the preview of that game later on during the week. But, man, I think if I'm Michigan, or I should say when I'm talking about Michigan, I'm almost looking at them from a college football playoff standpoint. I've said this on Twitter a few times. This is not a year where you have a 2019 LSU. This is not a year where you have a 2020 Alabama. This isn't a year where you have a great team. Okay, Georgia has struggled with Kentucky and Missouri. All right, USC is looking pretty good, but their defense has some big-time holes on it. And TCU, you can say what you want about the Horned Frogs. I don't think you have a great team this year. Now, if Michigan can be explosive in the passing game, along with that running game, along with that great defense that they have right now, maybe this is Michigan's year. And, man, would I love to see a Big Ten champion be the national champion. That would be great as well. I'm going to start with some surprises. When you enter a Big Ten season, you never know what you're going to get, right? It's like a box of chocolates, okay? And, coming into this season, we knew, okay, Michigan's probably going to be good. Ohio State's probably going to be good. And beginning of the season, I said, yeah, 4, maybe 5 teams could win the Big Ten West. Here were some surprises that I looked at in the Big Ten. I think the first thing you got to talk about when you talk about surprises is Illinois. Okay, you look at last year. This last year was a team that beat Penn State in Happy Valley. I don't think them going 8-4 is necessarily a surprise. It's just how much they improved as a football team that I think is a surprise to me. Okay, I thought Illinois would improve, but I looked at their schedule and I'm like, man, I just don't see it. I just don't see them breaking through and contending for a West Division championship. But when I looked at Illinois coming into this season, the big question for me and the big key for me was the quarterback position. Tommy DeVito really stepped up and really became a big part of this team, because you kind of look at the past of last year with Illinois. They had Chase Brown, no question about it. Chase Brown was doing great. And this year he was great as well, but it was the quarterback that really opened up the offense. They were able to throw the football down the field a little bit more because they got good wide receivers. I think we learned that this year. And then, of course, the defense took a gigantic step forward. And this is an Illinois team that's going to be good, I think, for a good amount of time. I don't know if they're going to be 9 wins. I don't think they're going to be 10 wins. But sitting right there at 8-4, I would have said that was a surprise coming into the season. I thought they'd be right around bowl eligibility, 5 wins, 6 wins, 7 wins, kind of something in that category. But 8-4, contending for the Big Ten West Championship late in the season, I think that was a surprise for Illinois. Was Nebraska continuing to fail a surprise? Now looking back on it in hindsight, it doesn't surprise anybody, right? Scott Frost gonna Scott Frost, okay? But what they did in the transfer portal, right? Bringing in all these guys, revitalizing the coaching staff with Mark Whipple, a guy that coached a Heisman finalist. Mickey Joseph, we know what he did, and we know what he has done since then this season. All of the pieces seem to have come together, but the leadership was lacking. And I think the reason why this maybe isn't a surprise to some people, I think it's a little bit of a surprise to me. Look, I wasn't going to sit here and say Nebraska was going to win the Big Ten West, because I don't think they were going to in August. But I sure as hell thought they'd be better than 3-9 or 4-8. I'll tell you that much. I thought Nebraska was going to make a bowl game, but man, I did not expect them to have a season like that. I think that's what I'm referring to with the surprise. Okay, like I said, in hindsight, it doesn't seem that surprising because we know what we now know with Scott Frost. But maybe brighter times are on the horizon for the University of Nebraska. But them failing the way they did, considering the talent that they had coming back and coming in, I think maybe is a little bit of a surprise for fans at Nebraska. What about the demise at Michigan State? Okay, 11 wins a year ago. I did not expect them to take a dip down and not be a bowl eligible team. Okay, when you look at Michigan State, I really thought the combination of Jarek Broussard and Jalen Berger would combine for numbers around what Kenneth Walker did as one person. I've been a little bit disappointed, I guess, in Jarek Broussard. I really thought he'd be better. This Michigan State run game has gotten better as the season has gone on. I don't think there's any question about that. But when I look at Michigan State, I really thought they'd be better. I still thought Peyton Thorne was going to be fine. I think he got better later in the season, but for the most of the season, I don't think he really got any better at the quarterback position. I thought Jaden Reed and these receivers, that were like, when their backs were really against the wall and they really had to win to make bowl games, that's when they decided to turn it on. But for the most part, this Michigan State team was kind of a surprise and not in a good way. And let's finish things up with Purdue winning the Big Ten West. I guess it's not a huge surprise that Purdue specifically won the Big Ten West. I thought they'd be a solid team coming into the season. I think a surprise for the Boilermakers was the emergence of Charlie Jones and just how good Charlie Jones was, especially early in the season. He was kind of in a line of those great Purdue wide receivers, David Bell, Rondale Moore, those types of guys. And maybe there's another receiver on that Iowa team, Keegan Johnson, that wants to transfer to Purdue and sees what happened if he transfers to West Lafayette. See if he can put up the type of numbers that Charlie Jones did. But I think the surprise was a variety of things with Purdue, because there was times where they looked to be dead in the water and then they kept on fighting back. I don't know if it's much of a surprise that Purdue made the Big Ten championship game. I think the surprise was just how the Big Ten West kind of sorted out in general. Right? There were times when early in the season, right after they beat Michigan State, Minnesota's the Big Ten West champion, right? And then they fall off the wagon. And then Illinois, we thought, they're going to do it. They're going to beat Michigan State. They're going to beat Purdue, and either they might lose to Michigan, but they're going to go to the Big Ten championship game. And then they fall off the wagon. And maybe the inconsistency, the surprise, maybe that wasn't a surprise with Purdue going to the Big Ten championship game as Big Ten West champions. It was a hell of a year. And it's always fun, but you never really can predict these surprises, can you? So those are kind of my surprises that I have here in this season. Going to quickly try to get caught up here on some comments. Lord Raiden, thank you for checking in. Look, I thought they'd get to a bowl game. I think I had them at 7-5, 8-4, somewhere in that area. Obviously, in hindsight, we're looking at this from a November perspective. We got our November glasses on. And it's hard to put ourselves kind of back in August. But I really thought that, they beat Georgia Southern. Like, if you kind of look at this, I really thought they'd beat Georgia Southern. And then maybe they wouldn't beat Oklahoma. But man, you kind of look at how they played down the stretch, probably should have beaten Wisconsin, should have beaten Georgia Southern, you kind of add some things up and, maybe should have gotten 2 more wins out of the deal. But shoulda, coulda, woulda, of course, is the name of the game sometimes with these things here. So those are kind of my surprises. Mark Edwards checking in. Thanks for being here. No one saw this coming just about 50 years ago, 1976. Love some history. Purdue produced one of its most shocking upsets ever. The Spoilermakers, as we know it, defeated number 1 Michigan. I love the history pulls here. The Spoilermakers, they've been called that here for quite some time. So, like I said, I thought Purdue was a solid team. Like, you look at week 1, they came out and played a really good game against Penn State. If they would have been able to run the ball, get into a 4-minute offense, they maybe would have came out on top in that game against the Penn State Nittany Lions. So, so there's that. But Illinois, I think, is the biggest surprise to me. I really believe that. Kind of meshing some 2 topics together. Mark Edwards, the biggest Big Ten surprise, more than one. How about Fickle to Wisconsin? We'll get to that here later in the show. I will tease you with this. It's a good move. It's a borderline great move. There's a lot of people that are on the team or that were with the team, alumni, that aren't a fan of this move. But sometimes rocking the boat is necessary to make things happen. I don't think about that. Lord Raiden coming in and says, yeah, it's got to be Illinois. Like I said, I thought Illinois would be maybe around that bowl eligibility, but then they really surprised a lot of people. It's all going to depend, can they continue to do this? Can they continue to put this great effort forward? Joseph Ford, biggest surprise, September through October 31st, Illinois being good, and then the biggest disappointment was Illinois in November. If you talk to Brett Bielema, there might be some other things that might be surprising. And maybe it's not surprising, the efforts of the guys in stripes. If you've been following him on Twitter lately, you know what I'm talking about. But I think a lot of people agree. It is Illinois that was the biggest surprise of the Big Ten football season. So I think that's how things go. A lot from Mark Edwards. Appreciate all the comments here today. Illinois in the West. How about Penn State 10-2 in the East? Okay. So Penn State at 10-2 doesn't surprise me. I picked them to go 10-2 with the losses to Michigan, with the losses to Ohio State. I think coming into this season, and I was kind of banking on, Nick Singleton, Gatorade High School Player of the Year, that he was going to come in and be a good player. Him and Katron Allen were really good players. I think that's just how the schedule kind of shook out with Penn State. I think preseason, the only game that really I had trouble going back and forth over was the Purdue opener in West Lafayette. But Penn State obviously put together a great season. I'm not sure how big a surprise necessarily that is, but we'll see. I've been thinking about this too. You would think that Bielema, Benedict Arnold move would soften some of these Wisconsin alumni. Man, I really thought, I wonder, we'll never know, but I always wonder, I wonder if Brett Bielema in Wisconsin had conversations to bring Brett, especially after this season that Illinois had, to bring Brett Bielema back to Madison. You can't help but think. He would have been a great option, but I think that ship definitely had sailed between those two. Let's see what else we got in the comments. Thank you guys for all the comments. Andy T checking in. Ranked the Big Ten West coaches first to last. Might have to do a video on that kind of ranking, power ranking coaches, power ranking teams, that kind of thing. New or old coaches, I think I think at the end of the season, right? If we're thinking of the current coaches, if we include the fired coaches, I think Christ and Frost, I think you got to put Brett Bielema at the top in the Big Ten West of the job he's done rebuilding an Illinois program that was very bad under Lovie Smith. Has been nothing short of phenomenal. Like that defense, one of the very best in the Big Ten. What Chase Brown's been able to do, getting his transfer quarterback Tommy DeVito, and what that offense turned into, I think that was really good. But I'd put Jeff Brom up there. Because then I think there's a cluster of guys. I think there's a cluster when you look at Jeff Brom, when you look at P.J. Fleck. I think you got to throw him in there. Even though he did not win a game on American soil, Pat Fitzgerald is still a good head coach. Okay, I know he has fallen on tough times at Northwestern, but I still believe he can be a good head coach. It'll be interesting to see what the Wildcats do with the future with him. But I'd go Bielema. And then maybe 2A and 2B right now, I'd probably go Jeff Brom and P.J. Fleck. Maybe Kirk Ferentz. Then you got Kirk, so maybe I'll correct myself. Maybe Bielema and Ferentz are 1A and 1B, and then you have Brom and Fleck as 2A and 2B. I think there's a lot, and now with Fickle and RHULE coming into the Big Ten West, I think there's a lot of good coaches. But in terms of this season, if we're solely focusing on this season and the coaching job, I'd probably go with Brett Bielema as number one. We know all about the issues that the Ferentzes have had. Okay, this season. And I might get into that a little bit later. With all of these coaching moves going on in the Big Ten West, right? RHULE bringing a lot of positivity and optimism to Nebraska. You look at, of course, Luke Fickell at Wisconsin. There's a lot of optimism at these programs. And these programs are adapting to the changing times in college football. You know who's not adapting? Iowa. Very interesting to see if they're going to go out into the transfer portal and get a quarterback, or did they see enough out of Alex Padilla in this game against Nebraska? I thought he played pretty decent in that second half. Look, he didn't play great, obviously, but maybe, it would be the most Iowa thing ever. It's like, you know what? We saw something out of that guy. We saw something. It's also going to be interesting if the Hawkeyes are going to hold on to Brian Ferentz. Because there was a point in the season where it's like, yeah, of course they're going to fire Brian Ferentz. Why wouldn't they? Step in, Gary Barta. But now they put together some success. Middle of the season, of course, they floundered against Nebraska. Now it's going to be interesting because I think there was some momentum that they were carrying going into that Nebraska game where maybe Brian Ferentz wasn't doing terrible as a coordinator. So that's going to be very interesting to follow as we continue to go down the pike here right now. Let's see what else we got going on in the comments right now. How about this? How about a Michigan-Ohio State playoff scenario? Lord Raiden thinks OSU should be out with only 4 slots. It should be conference champs only. If you're not the best in your conference, you have no business trying to be the best in the country. I get that. The current criteria for the college football playoff as it's listed is the 4 best teams in the nation. Well, if USC falls, if TCU falls, actually, technically, if only one of those fall, now that Clemson lost a game, right? I think by default they might back their way into the Big Ten, or not the Big Ten championship, back their way into the college football playoff. Look, you look at this year, I said it at the top of the show, this is not a year where there's great teams. And maybe Ohio State, look, as a Big Ten guy, Big Ten Ted, I want to see 2 Big Ten teams in the college football playoff, no doubt about it. But, I mean, I kind of agree with what Lord Raiden is in here. I honestly believe that, back in 2014? Back in 2014, I think, if Notre Dame was in a conference, I honestly believe it would be the top 4 conference champions. But since Notre Dame's not in a conference, big name in college football, it's not that way. That's kind of how I see things happening right now. So that's kind of a lot of comments coming in. Really appreciate it. Going to try to get to as many as I can. Right now, I'm going to just quickly wrap up this Ohio State and Michigan deal, right? A lot of people are talking about Ryan Day. Ryan Day has lost now 2 games pretty much the same way, with some differences, right? I think Michigan was more explosive in the 2022 game than the 2021 game. So there's different things there. It'll be very interesting to see what his future is because right now the conference has shifted to Michigan, right? When it was Ohio State for all of those years, now Michigan is the power broker in the Big Ten Conference. So the question has to be, what does Ohio State do? Like, you're not firing a guy that goes 11-1 consistently. You're just not doing that. But Ohio State wants to go out and they want to win these types of games. I think the thing for the Buckeyes and the thing for Ryan Day is they can't regress. Now all of a sudden, you're losing to Michigan twice, you're losing to Michigan 3 times. Oh, and now you fall to Penn State. Oh, and now you get upset by whoever. Illinois. I don't know. You just can't regress, I think, because now once you start losing to Penn State, once you start getting upset in some of these games, that's when the whispers turn into talk, and then the talk turns into screams. You know what I mean? It's just, it kind of keeps progressing. And maybe Ryan Day will be in a situation where he keeps on winning. Maybe he'll catch. I always thought he'd be a guy that would eventually go to the NFL. Okay, that's where I saw Ryan Day. And whether that will happen, that remains to be seen. But it should be interesting to see what the future is with Ryan Day at Ohio State. If he continues to stay there, what the future is. Of course, people have been talking about with Luke Fickell now going to Wisconsin. Maybe he's gearing up eventually for being the head coach at Ohio State. So that will be interesting to see if that happens, if that Wisconsin job is just a warm-up job for Fickell to eventually get the job at Ohio State. So it'll be very, very interesting. Got some playoff scenarios here from Mark Edwards. Got to ask, and I really don't want to care, but as a Big Ten fan, does Ohio State end up 4, 5, or 6? Because the odds of TCU, USC or TCU isn't 0. USC plays Utah, which I believe is their only loss this season. TCU plays Kansas State, and I believe that game was very close earlier this season. If both of those teams win, it is as clear-cut as it gets. It's Georgia, it's Ohio State, it's wherever the committee ranks these two teams. I'd probably put USC at 3 and maybe TCU at 4. That's not the matchup that Michigan wants. If I'm the Michigan Wolverines, I don't want to play the USC Trojans. Not saying my defense can't compete against USC, but I would rather play TCU. I'd rather match up against the Horned Frogs. I don't think there's any question about that. In this most recent poll, what we're going to see on Tuesday, I think they're going to be somewhere around 5 or 6. I don't think they're going to be 4. I think USC and TCU are both going to leapfrog them. And then you look at who are they competing against. It would have been LSU, but of course they go down to Texas A&M. I think Ohio State's sitting there, right there at number 5. And if everybody in that top 4 wins out, they're in. If somebody flips up and somebody loses, it's Ohio State that backs their way into the college football playoff. I really think that's the scenario, right? With LSU losing, with Clemson losing, things get really weird if now LSU can come back and beat Georgia. Then if USC and TCU both lose, we could see some major chaos, especially if LSU can beat the Georgia Bulldogs in Atlanta for the SEC championship. This should be interesting to see if that continues to happen. So let's kind of pivot into talking about this Big Ten championship game, sneak peek style, Michigan and Purdue. The big question, really maybe the only question when looking at this matchup, is Purdue got a chance? Like, that's the thing that needs to be asked. Like, you look, the only really thing that, because Michigan is very good. We saw how good they were in the secondary. I want to talk about a guy that I believe could be argued as the best defender on Michigan, and it's Mike Sanders still. Like, what he has done converting to wide receiver, did not play defensive back before this season. Converting from wide receiver to defensive back, man, I've been watching Big Ten football. I've been watching NFL. I've been watching football for a very long time, 20 years or so. I don't know if I've ever seen a better play from a defensive back on that play in the end zone when the ball's coming into the Ohio State wide receiver's hands and then he just punches it out at the very last second. Of course, when you're watching it on television in a super slow-mo, very high frame rate, 240 frames per second camera, it obviously looks like, he reacted in a normal period of time. But when that's a bang-bang play, when that's full speed, that is very tough to do, and Mike Sanders still has done a great job really evolving and making that secondary better. That's going to be the big matchup, okay? It's going to be Michigan's secondary against Purdue's wide receivers, a.k.a. Charlie Jones. Okay, if Charlie Jones can't have a breakout game, how does Purdue get it going? Do they try to run the ball with Devin Mockabee? You think you're going to run the ball against that Michigan front? I'm trying to pinpoint various things, and Michigan just has to try to prevent the big play. They have to try to prevent Aiden O'Connell being able to sit back there comfortably and try to pick them apart right now. I think that's the big thing that we got to talk about. Is Purdue going to run the football? Purdue, as Robert here is alluding to, Purdue's been inconsistent this season. Okay? There were times early in that game against Indiana where that game was a little bit in question. Of course, they kind of pulled away as this game got later. And then you talk about the Purdue defense. You talk about the Purdue defense, you got to talk about the health of the Michigan running game. Even if Donovan Edwards is the only guy to go, I still think this is a Michigan, especially the offensive line, that can push around Purdue. Purdue's not a bad defense. I think they're below average to average as far as the Big Ten is concerned. But when I look at this, man, it's just Michigan. I think what they're gonna try to do is they're gonna try to come out. They're gonna look at the Purdue defensive front. And it's like, yes, we can bully you, and we're going to bully you. Like if Blake Corum is 100%, if Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards are 100%, forget about it. Like, I'm sorry. Purdue is probably going to be able to get some downfield shots at some point, but I just don't see this being a great game. I think Iowa, personally, you can say what you want about the Hawkeyes. I think Iowa maybe would have been a better matchup, especially with their great defense. If Purdue can get their best effort on offense, when they play their best on the offensive side of the ball, hey, maybe they can get a couple of big shots down the field. You know, maybe this is a Purdue team that can get it going in that respect. So I think that's something that you got to talk about. But, man, you kind of go back to that Michigan secondary with the best pass defense this season in the Big Ten Conference. It's going to be extremely, extremely difficult, I think, for Purdue to hang in this one. They might hang around for a little bit, but I don't think they're going to hang around for very long. Like when I look at a power ranking type of scenario for the Big Ten West, I think Illinois is number one. Iowa's probably in Iowa won the head-to-head over Purdue. Despite what happened, I'm still probably putting Iowa because of that elite defense ahead of Purdue. And then look at Purdue and Minnesota. Purdue's probably 3. I think Illinois. You put Illinois on a field with Michigan again in a rematch? We'll see. And I know that Michigan-Illinois game was close because of the injury of Blake Corum. I think it would have been a very different game if Blake Corum is able to play the full 60 minutes at full strength. But I think Michigan-Illinois is the power rankings-wise, I think that's the best matchup. But obviously, we don't play the Big Ten championship game off of power rankings. No question about that. So I think you're going to see another Michigan beatdown because I think that's what Michigan needs to have. They got the confidence against Ohio State. You need to have what you had last year. Go into Indianapolis. You know, you got to win one game to get to the college football playoff, and then all bets are off. You got to keep that confidence up, and most importantly, you got to stay healthy. If Blake Corum isn't 100%, don't play him. Okay, don't risk further injury, because what did you prove last week? You proved that you can win the game with Donovan Edwards back there. Preseason, I thought Donovan Edwards might give Blake Corum a run for his money in terms of the starting running back in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So I think you're fine. Okay, if Blake, I would not risk it that much. That's all I'll say about Blake Corum. Maybe have him in uniform, just in case. Maybe have him dress, but yeah. Going for Gold 85, I appreciate the super chat once again, everybody. You can support the channel with a super chat. So I get to your comments, so make sure I read your comment, answer your comment. It really helps support the channel and grow the channel. Late to the party, but hey, hello. Here's some support, Ted. Go Big Red. Appreciate that. Surprised by the Fickle to Wisconsin hire. Where does that leave Jim? No better time than ever. A super chat gets me to transition to this. Jim Leonhard he's not coming back to Wisconsin. He's not. He put too much effort, and I think I've watched some of his press conferences the last few weeks. Reporters have kind of asked him about being the permanent head coach. He seemed a little irritated. Like, that's what I got out of Jim Leonhard. And I think Jim Leonhard, I guess Mickey Joseph could kind of do this as well. I think it's time for Jim Leonhard to graduate from Wisconsin. Like, there's going to be a lot of guys that are going to transfer out of Wisconsin. There's already, I can't remember, I'd have to look it up on Twitter here, but top commit, I think, in the recruiting class for Wisconsin has already flipped to Notre Dame. Like, there's going to be a lot of moving parts with this Luke Fickell transition to the University of Wisconsin. And Jim Leonhard, I do not think is going to be a guy that's going to be in Madison. So that leaves us to talk about where does Jim Leonhard end up. I've been hearing it, a few tweets here and there. Jim Leonhard to Nebraska for defensive coordinator. Not sure if he has any sort of relationship with Matt Rhule, but that's been floated around. You know, obviously he can be a high-level defensive coordinator really anywhere. So if a team of major power is looking for a defensive coordinator, I think Jim Leonhard's that guy. Or does Jim Leonhard feel, hey, it's time for me to start my head coaching journey? Is he going to a a group of 5 school, or is he going to a lower Power 5 school? I know Colorado has been in discussions with Deion Sanders. If it doesn't work out with Coach Prime, is that a situation where he could go out west to the beautiful Rocky Mountains and city of Boulder, Colorado? I think there's a lot of options. I just don't think coming back to Madison, Wisconsin is really one of them. So very much appreciate the super chat going for Gold 85, friend of the channel. So let's talk more about Robert Gill wants him to come to Purdue. Hey, maybe we could rebuild that defense that way. Let's talk about lose my train of thought. Let's talk about Matt Rhule to Nebraska, and let's talk about Luke Fickell to Wisconsin. That's where I kind of want to transition to right now. First guy I want to talk about is Matt Rhule. Okay, Matt Rhule is a good rebuilder of programs. Okay, I don't think there's any question in that regard. Matt Rhule is a guy that can come in there. He did it at Temple, a couple of 10-win seasons at Temple. He took a Baylor team 1-11 his very first year under that Art Briles scandal situation, rebuilt the program, 11 wins. I believe that year at Baylor, where they won 11 games in 2019, I believe that they were a win or so away from going to the college football playoff that season. I think that's Nebraska is in a situation where bring in a good assistant coaching staff. Make sure you try to hold on to Mickey Joseph so you can hold on to some of these recruits right now. It's gonna get really tough. Okay, I believe Matt Rhule can get Nebraska to a point where they are winning 7, 8, 9 games. We've seen it's been a long time since Nebraska has really, you could say, well, Nebraska's proven in recent history that they can win 9 and 10 games every year like they did under Bo Pelini. That was a long time ago. Okay, the college football world has changed, and Nebraska is evolving. Trev Alberts and everybody, their NIL collectives, I think recently they just merged their 2 NIL collectives. Right now, I think Nebraska is going to be there. And I think I've been watching Matt Rhule interviews, and every interview he talks about, I love developing kids. I love taking kids and getting them to the NFL, and that's what Nebraska needed. They needed a developer. Scott Frost proved that he could recruit top 5 classes in the Big Ten, top 25 to 30 classes nationally, but he couldn't hold on to them, and he couldn't develop them worth a lick. I no matter if you're a Husker fan or you're not, I think that's one thing we can agree on, is that Scott Frost, one of the worst developers I've maybe seen watching Big Ten football for 20 some years. So if you can think of a worse developer, leave that in the comments. But right now, Scott Frost might lead the way. Okay, there was so much talent that he also let go kind of before the transfer portal was a thing as well. So I look at Rhule. I'm optimistic. He's done it in the Big 12. He's done it in the American. But the Big 10 is a different ballgame, man. There are expectations at Nebraska that there aren't anywhere else. Nebraska has big-time support, big-time expectations. If you're winning 6 and 7 games in year 3, you're going to hear about it, Matty Rhule. Okay? I think this is a guy that's going to, if I'm Matt Rhule, I am the only thing I'm keeping. Well, maybe, besides, I'm not talking about players, but in terms of the culture and in terms of the coaching staff and things like that, the only guys I'm probably keeping are Mickey Joseph and maybe Bill Bush. Okay? That's what I'm focusing on right now if I'm Matt Rhule. Should be interesting. He wants to rebuild a new culture, tough, physical mentality. That's what Trev Alberts talked about many times in his interviews, kind of radio interviews leading up to this hire. So, man, it should be interesting to see what Matt Rhule can do at Nebraska. I think he can be solid. Can Matt Rhule take Nebraska to a 9 and 10 win team? Look, this is a different era. This is a different program. Can he take the Huskers to that? I don't know. We're probably going to get to a point where we don't have divisions anymore. If we had an East-West split, you say you just put USC and UCLA in the West and you head Purdue out to the East, I'd say, yeah, maybe. But now when you got Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, and USC are going to be your Elite Four programs every single season, it's going to be tough. And I think some programs, your Wisconsins, your, I guess, Northwestern, that's since they won a couple of West Division titles. Iowa, so Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota could probably be thrown in there, Purdue. You're going to have to adjust your expectations. Because getting to the Big Ten championship every year, it seemed like that for Wisconsin, that's not going to be a reality. I'll get to Wisconsin. I'll get to Luke Fickell in just a minute. But for Matt Rhule, I think, like, don't get all in and think he's going to win 9 to 10 games in year 2 or year 3. So that's kind of how I feel. I want to talk about M. Goboski is kind of bringing up a point, scrapping divisions. Here's what I want to see. Look, I saw what Michigan and Ohio State, great game, great build-up, great game. Now imagine if we didn't have divisions this year, we'd be playing that game again in Indianapolis. I've gone back and forth on this. I really have. Because we just saw Michigan and Ohio State play, and Michigan was the better team. Absolutely. But now we're going to play again in Indianapolis in the Big Ten championship game? I don't know. I don't know. It just seems like I just want to avoid those rematches, those back-to-back weeks. That's what I want to avoid. Maybe you can pair some of these teams together and do like every 3 or 4 years, do like a divisions draft where there's some sort of, we had leaders and legends before where they appeared to be balanced. I would just like to keep Ohio State and Michigan together in the same division. Wisconsin and Minnesota together in the same division and just keep on going and keep on going. You know what I mean? Like I think the Big 12 has done something where, remember, they don't have divisions where I think what they do is they don't put their rivalry games on the very last Saturday. But then again, I should correct myself. We saw like Kansas and Kansas State play. I think it varies because Oklahoma and Oklahoma State played the week, but the second to last week of the season. So that's something that could be done. You play your rivalry, your big rivalry games the week before, the second to last week of the season. So I'm very interested to see what Kevin Warren is going to do and the Big Ten staff is going to do. Everybody's going to no divisions, and I think that's what we're going to do. I think the Big Ten is going to scrap divisions. I think it's going to make Big Ten play a little bit more interesting, especially in the race at the top. But like I said, those teams that are used to making the Big Ten championship game out of the West Division got to alter your expectations. Mickey knows. Big Ten East likes it because it guarantees the East wins the championship. Did you know the West has not won a Big Ten title since we've done the East-West split when Rutgers and Maryland joined the conference all the way back in 2014. Mark is kind of on board with me playing 3 times a year, like if they met in the playoff. No way. I think you got to keep these rivalry games special. Okay, like, I don't know what you got to do. I think playing them a week earlier, I wouldn't be opposed to that, but then you kind of, I don't know. If you guys got solutions, I'd be willing to hear them, but I just don't know the solution. I just don't want to see Michigan and Ohio State play back-to-back weeks because it really, kind of messes things up. So, I don't know. That's the way I see it. But I do think, I know I'm kind of going back and forth this, but no divisions is the better way. Like, we've got Michigan playing Purdue. Last week we had Last year we had Michigan and Iowa. Like, this year, the power rankings in the Big Ten, if you're looking at the best teams, you're looking at Michigan 1, you're looking at Ohio State 2, you're looking at Penn State 3. Like, you're looking at East Division teams. So, I don't know what the answer is. I've said that a million times already. I don't know what the answer is, but I just don't want to see those games repeated. And who knows? You might play Ohio State and Michigan the second to last week of the season. Then on Thanksgiving weekend, you might have Ohio State and Wisconsin. But maybe Ohio State and Wisconsin are back-to-back, and we play another back-to-back anyways. It's just like, I don't know if you can truly avoid it. You can try to put those games like that. But it's just like, well, I just saw this game, and now I see it again. I already know who's the better team. I just saw that game. I don't need to see it again. Right now, the East-West split kind of solves that problem. But with new television partners coming in that want to see big-time college football, especially in the biggest game of the year, the Big Ten championship game, I don't think they're going to fly. I don't think the East-West split is going to fly for those new television partners. I don't think there's any arguing that right now. Just continuing to look at some of these chats here, getting caught up once again. USC and UCLA, it appears that's going to be the death of divisions in the Big Ten Conference. It's just the way the game is going right now. That's just the direction college football is headed. It's just the truth. Like, there are some things you might not like in college football. You might not like transfer portal. You might not like NIL. But at some point you got to get on board. Let's talk about Luke Fickell. Haven't got to him yet. And I am going to talk, I just saw some comments of comparing Michigan and Georgia. We'll talk about that later on in the show. But I want to talk about Luke Fickell, headed to Wisconsin. Okay, I am one of these guys that thought Jim Leonhard was almost a shoo-in. I thought he'd have to screw up royally to not be named the head coach at Wisconsin. But Chris McIntosh, credit to him, is thinking outside the box. Okay, Wisconsin is so used to being in the Barry Alvarez circle. Okay, outside of that Gary Anderson experiment, every head coach since 1990 has been within the Barry Alvarez family tree, so to speak. Okay? Like, we're in a situation, remember Barry Alvarez, and you know who was the defensive coordinator under Barry Alvarez when he retired? Brett Bielema. Brett Bielema took over. He left. Gary Anderson came in. He decided he didn't like Wisconsin. He went out back to the Pacific Northwest to go to Oregon State. Didn't last long there either. I think he might have went to Utah State eventually. I don't know. I can't remember. And then after Gary Anderson left, they brought in Paul Chryst, who was coming off a 6-6 season as head coach at Pitt. Because he was a guy, remember, he was the offensive coordinator at Wisconsin under Brett Bielema. And then when Paul Chryst got fired, it was former Wisconsin All-American Jim Leonhard, defensive coordinator, that became the interim head coach, which many people expected him to be the permanent head coach. Okay, so for the first time in forever, Wisconsin is going in a direction that doesn't involve a Barry Alvarez disciple. College football is changing, and I'm not saying the way Wisconsin plays is old school and you can't win anymore. Look at Michigan and how physical they are. But Michigan, I think one thing that we've seen with Michigan is you need good quarterback play. J.J. McCarthy was a good quarterback. You can say what you want about Cade McNamara. Guy didn't turn the ball over until the 7th, 8th game of the year last year. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say that Cade McNamara is a great quarterback because I don't think he is. If you're a team like an Iowa, if you're a team maybe like a Wisconsin, you're looking for a transfer portal quarterback, Cade McNamara might be on your list of guys this season. But when I look at Luke Fickell, this is a hire that's outside the norm at Wisconsin. This is a hire that, look, things already have been tumultuous. You see players going on Twitter, former players going on Twitter and saying, I don't know, man, this ain't it. Because they supported what Jim Leonhard was doing. Jim Leonhard was a players coach. A lot of players really like Jimmy Leonhard. But Luke Fickell is a guy that has proven he got G5 Cincinnati to the college football playoff. I believe this is a guy that Luke Fickell, I think, can take Wisconsin to a higher level than Paul Chryst or Jim Leonhard could. If you're looking at Jim Leonhard, or, let's just stick with Jim Leonhard. If you're looking at Jim Leonhard, you're looking at Wisconsin through the after the Rose Bowls at Ron Dayne. You're looking at Wisconsin from 2002 to maybe before Russell Wilson, 2008-9. You're looking at teams that are usually going 7, 8, 9 type of wins. And then you're looking at the occasional year where you pull an upset. Remember John Stocko's quarterback draw against Wisconsin and Madison. Was that 06 maybe? I think that was a really good year for Wisconsin. That's where you're at. But now with Luke Fickell, I believe this team's recruiting is going to change completely because Wisconsin had always been known as a program that developed guys. And maybe you sign 3-star guys, low 4-star guys, and then you develop them into great NFL players. I think that's where Wisconsin was. But now with Luke Fickell, I think he can bring in a different kind of guy. And you know what the crazy thing about Luke Fickell is, and the people that maybe don't like Luke Fickell that much, he kind of fits in to what Wisconsin has been doing. Like tough, physical mentality, good defense. Like Luke Fickell is that kind of guy that fits into what Wisconsin wants to do. That's kind of where it's at. So I think Luke Fickell's going to do a great job in Madison, Wisconsin. I think he's going to be very, very good. Big Ten Johnny checking in. Suppose I should clear the graphic to make sure that we see what Big Ten Johnny has to say. Was the Wisconsin head coach job determined by yesterday's game? I said it in my video. If you check out my reaction to Luke Fickell getting hired, I believe this game was decided at the Nebraska. I think the Nebraska game is where it flipped. Because remember, most of that game, Nebraska was leading, 14-3 for a lot of that game, and then Wisconsin came back in the fourth quarter. Like, this is a Nebraska team. This is one of the worst Nebraska teams we've seen in a very long time. This is a Wisconsin team that probably should have ran it down Nebraska's throat, and that should have done some good things. But it didn't happen. You know what else probably didn't help Jim Leonhard? Was that complete and utter debacle at the end of Saturday's game, where they got a backup quarterback in there. They got Chase Wolf in there. And he comes in, and it's like he'd never been in practice the whole season. I know he's been hurt. He was hurt a lot of this season. But, man, it seemed like he didn't know what was going on. Like, it seemed like, you're playing high school football, and your quarterback goes hurt. Oh, I guess we got to throw in the JV guy, And then the penalty after penalty after penalty. I could just see, I don't know how often they cut away on the ESPN broadcast of Jim Leonhard, but I could just see it was all coming to a head. It was all coming to an end right then and there. But I honestly believe it was the Nebraska game that was the big difference. That was the big flip for me. Our buddy Big Time Boiler checking in. If you haven't subscribed or if you haven't checked out his channel, there are very few sources that know more about the Big Ten West champion Purdue Boilermakers than this guy. So thanks for checking in, Grant. What a run Purdue is on. How many shots is the Big Time Boiler in by now? That's what I want to know. What's the over-under on that? Man, we talked about the top of the show. Friday, Gonzaga. Saturday, Big Ten title game, taking home the old Oaken Bucket. And then Sunday, today, beating Duke by 20. There's never been a better weekend in West Lafayette. There's never been a better weekend for the Purdue Boilermakers. Man, Matt Painter's team, top 10. At least. Put them in there. I definitely think that they deserve that. Saw some tweets. Caught a little bit of the game today against Duke. Not a ton. But, man, have they built a great team around Zach Edey. Right? So many times they put the ball into Zach Edey. And Edey is a good scorer. But, man, what Edey does as well is he distributes. He knows I got a three-point shooter here. I got a three-point shooter here. I got Braden over here. I got Fletcher over here. I have guys that I know can shoot the three. They've really surrounded Zach Edey with a lot of good pieces around here. Yeah, those penalty yarders, and that's not Wisconsin football. Like I even mentioned in my Iowa-Nebraska recap that said that's not Iowa football the way they were playing. Like penalties and mistakes, these Iowa and Wisconsin teams, what you can usually rely on with these guys is these are two of the most well-disciplined teams in the conference. And they were, well, to be honest with you, they were two of the least disciplined teams this weekend in the entire Big Ten Conference. Like, that's kind of where I sit on them right now. Man. So Luke Fickell at Wisconsin, I think, is going to be, once again, we are representing well in our beloved Big Ten, right? We've got two really good coaches coming in Matt RHULE and Luke Fickell. Okay, remember, one thing I think one of these guys is going to be very successful. I don't know which guy it's going to be quite right now, but I honestly believe one of these guys is going to turn out really well. I think these guys can be here for a while. I think the main concern I have with Luke Fickell, I think it's the worst kept secret right now, is he using this as a stepping stone to win Ohio State job? Comes open with Ryan Day. I think that's a big question to ask right now. Okay, is Ryan Day, maybe he goes to the NFL, whatever happens with Ryan Day. Is Luke Fickell just biding his time? He's an Ohio kid. He played at Ohio State. Of course, he was the interim coach for a season at Ohio State. Is this a situation where he's just kind of biding his time with a Big Ten program and eventually he makes the move to a big time program when that job comes open? I think that's the only way we could really see Luke Fickell leaving right now is if Ohio State comes open. I think I'm reading comments and doing this show at the same time. I need a producer. Where's Big Ten Johnny when you need him? Luke Fickell to Wisconsin, absolutely huge. Thanks, J-Man, for checking in. Patty Grimes thinking Nebraska and Wisconsin just got better. Look, I want to talk about this. Like I mentioned, those top four teams, USC, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan. What if Michigan State gets back to being a solid team like Mel Tucker's been doing really good recruiting? Minnesota is setting the bar at 8 wins for PJ Fleck. Like, that's 6 teams already. You're close to half of the conference. Like, it's going to be difficult. And this is what I love about you. I didn't even mention UCLA. I didn't mention Purdue. Like, there's a lot of teams out there that I didn't mention. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be a challenge for Luke Fickell at Wisconsin and Matt RHULE at Nebraska to really come in and win games, win 8 to 9 games a year. Like what Wisconsin was able to do in the Big Ten West, it's, winning those West Division titles, it's all great. It's all well and good. But what happened once he got there? Okay, I know there was one Big Ten championship game where they kind of took Ohio State to a one-possession game, but the cream will rise to the top. And I think we're going to see a lot of USC, Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan. Because those are the teams that recruit at a very high level. Those are top 10, top 15 classes every single year. So now, if you're a team, you either got to own the portal or develop kids like freaking crazy. Like, can Matt RHULE and Luke Fickell recruit at that type of level? I don't know. I think there is some uncertainty about some of these programs right now. I really do. So, going for gold, 85 checking in again. As a Nebraska fan who watched Chubba Purdy get sacked, fumbled the ball, and then recovered for a touchdown in his first snap, I sympathize for Wisconsin fans feeling like the JV guy was put in. I remember a game last season, I think Chase Wolf got put in, and it wasn't good. I forgot what game that was off the top of my head, but he got put in a game. Didn't look good. Not a lot of depth at quarterback right now. Jam City checking in. Appreciate you joining us. They're not letting Ryan Day go anywhere. Who'd they get to replace him? He's only going to lose 1 to 2 games every year. Rare to get a coach in that level of offensive prowess. Said this at the top of the show, Mr. J City. I think the only way that Ryan Day leaves is if he leaves to go to the National Football League. Like, you're not firing a guy. And I think what I want to see Ohio State. Look, they're losing to Michigan right now. They're getting out tough. They're getting out physical by Michigan these last 2 seasons. I just don't want to see them regress. I don't want to see them all of a sudden they lose to Penn State. Oh, all of a sudden they lose an upset game to Illinois. That's what I don't want to see. Here is Patty Grimes. The Big Ten can get better recruits once the playoffs expand to 12. That's a very solid point because I think that's the reason why the Ohio States, the Bamas, Oklahoma, what used to be Oklahoma, they're not doing too well these days. But, those Clemsons, those teams, I think the reason why they were so far and away above in terms of recruiting is because those were the teams that were going to the college football playoff consistently. Okay? So now that you have a 12-team playoff, now that if you get into the top 10 in the country, you can get there. Now I think you're going to see recruiting kind of even out a little bit. Oh, I got a shot. If I go to a program like a Penn State, I can make the playoff every year. We're a top 10 program. Now that kind of shifts things a little bit. If you want to win and you want to get to that next level, now there's going to be a lot more programs to do that at. And, of course, transfer portal kind of factors into that a little bit, And maybe that will help a program like a Nebraska or a Wisconsin that really has a lot on their plate. Should be interesting to see. Fickle sees something at Wisconsin, according to Big Ten Johnny. He wouldn't have taken the job if he didn't know he'd be successful. That Cincinnati's moving to the Big 12. I didn't think Luke Fickell maybe would be a guy that would make this jump. Okay, you're going to the Big 12. You've had success at Cincinnati. 12-team playoff, right? The Big 12 likely to have an automatic berth with the top 6 conference champions getting into the thing. I thought, yeah, maybe he seemed like he'd stay. But Luke Fickell has always said he's wanted to stay in the Midwest. And this is it. This is a jump up for him. It's a challenge. Of course, money is a big part of this. Not sure yet what Wisconsin is offering. I know Matt Rhule is 8 years, $72 million. That's a lot of cash. That's a lot of money that you're putting out on a guy that just got fired. I know it's the NFL. I know it's different. He hasn't coached in college since NIL and transfer portal were implemented, but that's a lot of money you're throwing at Matt Rhule. But, maybe for Luke Fickell, it was the money. We'll see. M. Goboski, give Ryan Day the Mel Tucker fraud contract. I think Mel Tucker, I think Michigan State. Look, we're going to see a lot of turnover, and I think Michigan State is fine with Mel Tucker right now as head coach. Jam City checking in. Fickell would have dominated in the Big 12 and increases recruiting with the bigger level of games. Cincinnati is rarely ever on national television. And maybe we'll see what Cincinnati does let's see what Cincinnati does going forward. Is this a program, do they have enough money in the bank to be able to go and hire a big-name head coach? I think they might get a G5 guy, like a Jamie Chadwell at Coastal Carolina or somebody like that, somebody who's doing really good in the group of 5, maybe to come over and make the jump. That's kind of where Cincinnati has been. Obviously, they've had Brian Kelly, Butch Jones, and now Luke Fickell, a coordinator, something like that. My top 4, Mr. Chenard. George, I got to get into this because I said in my video that Michigan should be number 1. And you know what? Let's talk about it. Michigan, numero uno. Michigan has thumped Penn State and Ohio State, both top 10 teams. Georgia's best wins are probably Oregon at the beginning of the season, just lost to Oregon State. They're a 9-3 football team. And there was one other one that I can't quite remember off the top of my head. But I believe Michigan, and it's a 1A and a 1B situation. And I know Georgia's going to be number 1 in the rankings. I just know it. But read the name of the channel. Shouldn't surprise you what I'm talking about right now. I'd put Michigan number 1. I'd put Georgia number 2. Right now, I would put, USC. I'll say USC number 3. And then I'll say TCU number 4. Once again, that's really close. And then Ohio State 5. That's my top 5 right now. I think those 4 are pretty solid. If all of them win out, Ohio State, I said this early in the show, is just going to be sitting right there at the number 5 spot, just kind of waiting for TCU or USC to fall, and then they'll be right there. M. Goboski wants Georgia to be – Georgia will be number 1. I just think there's an argument to be made for Michigan being number 1. It all depends on the matchups. I don't want to beat number 1. You want – M. Goboski wants Georgia to be number 1 and then go and beat Georgia. Wouldn't that be some good storytelling? The way Georgia beat down Michigan in that playoff, that Orange Bowl last year, and then they come back in, let's just call it, in a national championship scenario, and Michigan – gets the victory. I think that'd be a great matchup. You got to think, though, saw this tweet, you got to think for ratings, you want to see Georgia, Michigan, USC, and Ohio State. Like, TCU's the darling in there. And look, I think TCU has proven themselves as a really good football team. I don't think there's any question about that, but we'll see. You know, USC is an interesting case study because their defense is not good. Okay, I look at any of these teams. I look at TCU with Max Duggan. I look at Georgia. I look at Michigan. I look at all these teams, and I think they can go up and down. But as of right now, Caleb Williams is my Heisman Trophy winner. This is an offense that can move the football. This is a really good offense right now. I just don't think USC is there yet. I think they can get into the playoff. Maybe they can make it a game. But Lincoln Riley, Southern Cal, I want you to get better in the trenches. I want you to get better on defense by the time you play in the Big Ten. Because if you don't, ask Ohio State how that goes. If you don't get better in the trenches, Michigan is going to bully you around. So it should be interesting to see if USC gets that together by the time they enter the Big Ten Conference in 2024. A lot of other ranking predictions as well. John's thinking Scott Frost to Cincinnati. You know, I know, jokingly, we haven't heard from Scott Frost. We haven't heard from Paul Christ. Very curious to see where those guys go. I know Scott Frost has been rumored for the South Florida job. Right, he's won in that state, right? Of course, what he was able to do, an undefeated season at UCF before coming to Nebraska. We all know what they were able to do kind of over there. So I think he could fit right in at USF. I think he could make USF a good football team. I think Scott Frost can kind of go back to the group of 5 and kind of do some things again. So we'll see. Paul Christ is an interesting one. I don't know about Paul Christ right now. It'll be very interesting to see if he goes the group of 5 route or what happens there. More from Jam City. So if Corum plays Saturday, is Caleb still your Heisman winner? I think so. If Corum is healthy these past few weeks, I still think it's close, even if Corum is healthy. Blake Corum has done a phenomenal job, and he's done really good this season. I still think it's Caleb Williams, right? Blake Corum went down against Illinois. Didn't really. Actually, I still think he ran for 100 yards in that game against Illinois. I'd have to check the stats on that one. But, you know, if he doesn't play against Illinois, and then, of course, the Ohio State deal, I just think what Caleb Williams has been doing as of late, that fantastic performance against UCLA, I think this would be a neck-and-neck race, I think, between Corum and Williams. But now I think with Corum's injury, unfortunately, I think that kind of puts him back on the wayside right now. I think it's Caleb Williams as the Heisman Trophy winner. Prediction from M. Goboski that Blake Corum is not going to play. I said this earlier in the show. Okay, if Blake Corum is not 100%, you don't play him. You've already proved what you can do with Donovan Edwards as your running back, and you're taking on a Purdue defense that, well, they're not great, unfortunately. So that's kind of where I kind of sit right now. Going for gold, checking it again. The combination of NIL, transfer portal, soon to be extended playoff will change college football completely. It already has changed. I don't know for better or for worse, but we're already seatbelted into the roller coaster ride. Players deserve to be paid via NIL. Okay, and here's the problem that the NCAA did. They unleashed NIL with no restrictions. And now you're at a point where you can't take it away. You get into antitrust issues. Look, NIL is NIL. It's here to stay, and it is a extremely important part of a program. I think the University of Miami has done this, where they come in, they hire a general manager like the NFL. The general manager takes part of a lot of roster management, getting NIL deals, working with collectives, that kind of thing, so the coaches can focus on the X's and O's, practice development, that kind of thing. It'll be very interesting to see if we see more of those general manager type of roles at some of these bigger programs with coaches that just don't want to deal with this. Because I think as we go on, coaches are going to be like, I don't want to deal with this every single day. I want to worry about practice. I want to worry about my guys blocking better. I want to worry about guys wrapping up and driving a guy into the ground and tackling better. Like, that's just the way it is. NIL, unfortunately, it maybe should have been capped in the first place. Can you go back on it? Okay, because right now, imagine, I don't know if you can cap name, image, and likeness, because it is completely independent of what's happening with the school. It is not a school-sponsored thing, and I know there's collectives that the schools work with. I get that. But this is a player's right to go and make money off of his name, image, his or her name, image, or likeness. They should be able to profit as much as they want. It's American free enterprise. It's probably the way it should have been for a very long time, and we just kind of need to adjust to it. And now that's out of the bag, now that the toothpaste is out of the tube, I don't know if you can put it back in, to be honest with you. So that's kind of where I stand on that with name, image, and likeness. Maybe we get to a point where there's some sort of where players are paid a salary, okay, and there's a salary cap, $20 million or whatever it is, and then maybe that decreases the importance of NIL. I don't know. That's a pretty far-fetched situations. So that's kind of where it is. But I don't know. It should be interesting to see how that all plays out. But that seems like a off-season topic. Corum needs to play in the playoff, which they've already clinched. Yeah, I just don't think that I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think Corum's going to play, because I think they've already proven that they can win with Donovan Edwards. And they need Corum to go win a national championship. I think that's kind of the main thing for the Michigan Wolverines. And I think they can do it. I think if J.J. McCarthy and this passing offense, look, they might not even need a running game. J.J. McCarthy proved that he can throw the football all around the yard against Ohio State, and this is a Purdue secondary that's given up some yards this season. So, that's just where it is. So, Michigan is in a fantastic spot right now to go and win a national championship. So, should be interesting if they can press forward to do that. It's hard to believe that we're here at the end of a Big Ten football regular season. Man, it's crazy. It seems like I was just doing these Big Ten football previews before in August, and now here we are at the end of the season. Man, it's, what did we learn? I think that's kind of what I want to talk about now. What did we learn from this season? I think we learned that Michigan, this is now the whose conference it is. It has moved from Ohio State to Michigan. Michigan has owned the conference, has now dominated the conference because of their ability to be physical at the line of scrimmage and run the football. I think we also learned that Jim Harbaugh is the very best head coach in the Big Ten Conference. And honestly, I think he's a top 5 coach nationally. I'd have to kind of put together who sits where, but I honestly believe Jim Harbaugh is one of the very best head coaches. Remember in 2020, somebody brought this up in a comment on one of the videos I posted today. I think it was Lord Raiden. I can't remember. But somebody posted, remember when they wanted him, some people, I'm not saying everybody, but remember when some people wanted him gone in 2020? And obviously restructured his contract. They did what they needed to do. But yeah, crazy. Crazy times. Remember when we thought after the first game of the season in week 0, hey, maybe Northwestern is actually decent? Yeah, it was more about Nebraska than anything. Patty Grimes checking in. What if LSU upsets Georgia? Man, it kind of depends how everything else plays out. Like, what if LSU beats Georgia? And then what if LSU beats Georgia? What if TCU wins? USC wins? Michigan wins. Now you're looking at 1-loss Georgia, 1-loss Ohio State, and you're comparing those two teams. So then you kind of go in, talk about the resumes, and see what happens. Like, that's what you're looking at right here, right now. So, yeah, that's kind of how you're at. Should be. I think Georgia's going to be in, even if they do lose to LSU, unfortunately. I just think the committee right there. Can you imagine a college football playoff without an SEC team? You know they ain't going to let that happen. You know they ain't going to let that take place. I just want to give some updates on the channel and what's kind of coming up, because we've got right now with the regular season coming to a close, right? We don't have the football content to kind of fill up. We're going to have basketball. We're going to start kicking into some hoops content. We've got North Carolina and Indiana this week. Big time game, even though I heard North Carolina was in a 4 overtime game against Alabama. Not sure who ended up winning that game, but of course North Carolina ended up, I think they lost to Iowa State even before that. So this is a North Carolina team that's probably not going to be number 1 in the country. So North Carolina, Indiana, Illinois, and Maryland play at the end of the week in basketball as well, hoping to get some content out on that. And looking forward to having John Johnston from Core Nation talking about, hopefully that video will come on Friday. Going to have a conversation with him regarding the head coaching hire, how they kind of feel in Huskerland about Matt RHULE coming in to be the head coach at Nebraska. So lots to come on the channel, so make sure you stay tuned for all of that. It's been a great regular season. I just want to send a big-time thank you out to everybody who's watched. Want to send a big-time thank you to anybody that's gone out there and subscribed, that's liked the video. It means a lot. It means a lot that I can sit here, right, and we're on Thanksgiving weekend. Want to give thanks to you guys for watching and tuning in, and whether it's an on-demand video, whether it's a live stream. I definitely appreciate you guys hanging out with me throughout the year. Get to be able to talk Big Ten football, Big Ten basketball, Big Ten athletics. So I very much appreciate that. Jam City, yeah, there's no way Georgia leaves the top 4 right now. You got to keep an SEC team in, and that's kind of why going to a 12-team playoff with these guaranteed conference champions is probably the way to go. You avoid a lot of this bias, I think, that kind of comes in with the SEC right now. So that's kind of how I feel about it as well. So I think we're kind of winding down here a little bit. It's been a great live stream. I really appreciate you guys coming down and tuning in here. It's been a great season of Big Ten football. It's going to be a great season of Big Ten basketball as well. Very much looking forward to hoops content really kicking in, really ramping up, and who's going to make what bowl game. And I think the bowl matchups are very intriguing as well. And also, you bet your butt that the transfer portal, especially with what's happening at Wisconsin, especially what's happening at Wisconsin, Nebraska, new coaches, new stuff, there's going to be a lot of action in the transfer portal. And quickly, before I go, we got some more questions coming in. They want to keep me here. Who plays in the national championship game? Michigan. So in order to tell you who I think is playing in the national championship game, I need to set a Final Four. Okay? I'm going Georgia 1. I'm going Michigan 2. I'm going USC 3. Ohio State 4. I think TCU falls to Kansas State. I think USC beats Utah. So in order for that to happen, I think Georgia defeats Ohio State. I think Michigan defeats, who'd I have? USC? Yeah. I think really no matter what, I think it's going to be Michigan and Georgia in the championship. And of course it's going to be the Michigan Wolverines, right? Right? Yeah, I think Michigan right now is sitting in a great position. I haven't been overly impressed with the Georgia Bulldogs, right? Close games against Missouri. Close games against Kentucky. Haven't been impressed in some of their games. I think Michigan might have some better wins on their resume, especially if Michigan can get it together with the pass game. I think that's where things could really get very, very interesting. Okay, so that's kind of where I said. I think Michigan's going to be right there. I think they're going to be playing for a national championship. I really believe that because it's likely going to be Michigan and Georgia, number 1 and number 2 in the country. I think both of those teams match up really well with who is number 3 and number 4. So that's kind of who I got going in to the national championship. One thing, I mentioned transfer portal. One thing I kind of want to recap here is I mentioned it before, and now the rumors have been really heating up, is Braylon Allen. Okay, Braylon Allen was a supporter of Paul Chryst. I think Braylon Allen was a big believer of what was happening at Wisconsin with Jim Leonard and everything. And now that it's Luke Fickell as being the head coach, I really believe, right, there were rumors with Michigan and Braylon Allen tampering, that kind of thing. I honestly believe. There's going to be guys. I don't think Graham Mertz is going to be there. I don't think I honestly believe. I think Braylon Allen's going to transfer. And I think there's going to be a long line to recruit Braylon Allen to come to your school. I really believe that. Whether it's Michigan, whether it's somebody else who's going to make the best offer, I think will happen. Look, Wisconsin, and who knows? Luke Fickell might go into the transfer portal. He might be able to recruit, and he might be able to shuffle some things around and get some good players. Look, the transfer portal, I've heard from many sources, if you watch the Late Kick with Josh Pate, he's kind of said the same thing. It's going to be nuts this year. Like, this is the first year where it is going to be the wild, wild, wild freaking John Dutton West. Like, it is going to be crazy. Hold on to your horses. We're going to go for a rodeo. Like, it's going to be nuts. And I'm here for it. I think the transfer portal is, at the very least, it's fun. Okay? At the very least, it gives your team optimism, like free agency in the NFL, and says, well, if we can get this guy and this guy and this guy, like, look how Michigan State was able to turn around. Look at how some of these teams that go into the transfer portal that can compete then at a national level because of the portal. Now, just because you go into the portal doesn't mean that all of a sudden it's guaranteed that you're going to have success. Like, look at Michigan State this year. Nebraska, of course, is kind of another example. But also look at USC. Like, there's examples where when you go into the transfer portal, you can put it together. I think you need a good balance. I still think you need to recruit out of high school. You still need that strong recruiting class. But that transfer portal can really put you over the top. Those transfers that come into your program can really put it over the top. What will happen with Braylon Allen? I think he can be one of the best running backs in the Big Ten. You put Braylon Allen behind a Michigan offensive line, and he might be in the Heisman candidacy type of discussion. I really, really believe that. More college football playoff talks going on in the comments. Joseph Ford says, there's no way it comes down to Ohio State or Alabama. College football playoff doesn't take Alabama. Look, I want to agree with that. I really do. I just don't trust the committee right now. Like, if they take an Alabama over Ohio State, I will not be a happy camper. I honestly believe right now that it is going to be, I think Ohio State is the team that kind of slides in if USC or TCU trips up. But what if they both trip up? Like, this is what's great about this. There's so many scenarios still that kind of still exist in the college football playoff. Got some people saying that they want Alabama in the playoffs and they'd be a super free win. Yeah, this defense. Everybody preseason was talking about Will Anderson and then Alabama defense. Man, what Alabama defense? Man, it's crazy. You have a Nick Saban, those mid to late 2000s teams. You look back, if they would have been able to look into a crystal ball and look at these teams, they said, that's not Alabama football. It's not. The game has changed so much. And I'm not going to say that the dynasty ain't dead. The dynasty's still there. Alabama can still rebound, but there's so many things changing right now in college football that allows other teams to sneak in there. Like a TCU going undefeated, getting some transfers in there. A head coach like Sonny Dykes being able to kind of move this thing around. So should be interesting. I like what's happening right now. In the game of football. Look, there's so many off-season topics that you talk about and say it's ruining college football, it's doing this, it's doing that. But, man, at the end of the day, college football is still college football, and it is still the greatest game. It's the greatest sport on earth. It really is. More from James City. I mentioned, Mike Sanders still early. At what position would you draft him at, defensive back or wide receiver? Not a big draft guy. But I would probably say defensive back right now, but I would definitely leave the option open. If I'm an NFL team and I'm looking at this guy, I know he can do multiple things, where if I draft him at defensive back, I know he can be really good. I know he can cover well. At wide receiver, I know he can probably be a pretty good slot guy. Like, I think he can do both. I think he could be maybe one of those utility guys, maybe some sort of returner as well in the NFL. Maybe he plays defensive back and they use him in gadget offensive plays. I think he can be that kind of guy at the next level. I think he can be that kind of weapon in the National Football League. Mike Sanders, man, I've been watching him throughout the season. It's this game against Ohio State. It's crazy to me what they were able to do against those Ohio State wide receivers in the second half. Like I said it before, fantastic. Maybe some of the best adjustments we've seen. Even though I'm pretty sure J.J. McCarthy said in the post-game press conference that, we didn't make any adjustments. Maybe that was on the offensive side of the ball. Defense, though, they really did something to lock in and stopping that running game and slowing down their wide receivers in their passing game. Man, we talked about surprises earlier in the show. I think a big surprise for me was Travion Henderson. I know he was injured for a lot of this season, and I know that was a big part of things. But I really thought he'd have a better season. When we talked about the top running backs, I think you had to put him in there, and he took a step back. I think this season, injuries has a big part to play in that, but I thought we'd really see a lot of Travion Henderson. That's why we play the games. That's why we're here. This is why we love the game. More from James City. Do you honestly believe two SEC teams will chaotically end up in the top four? How does that happen? Well, if you do get two SEC teams, I think it's probably Bama and it's Georgia. And basically, for that to happen, Georgia would have to win. I don't think there's a scenario where LSU wins, Georgia drops, and then Bama. I don't think there's that scenario. I think the scenario is Georgia wins, Michigan loses, I guess. But in this scenario, Georgia wins, Michigan wins, USC and TCU both lose, and then somehow Ohio State, maybe Bama sneaks up in there. That's kind of a scenario. If maybe USC wins and TCU loses, if they're deciding between Ohio State and Alabama, man, I don't know how you pick Alabama, but I don't trust the committee right now to be 100% committed that is what's going to happen. I I don't see that. I just don't think Alabama has been a top 4 team this year. Look, there's been times where I'm saying Penn State is a better team than Alabama. Like, Alabama ranked where they're at just seems like, you're ranking them on the past 15 years. We're not Mark Ingram, McElroy. They ain't walking through that door. You know who's walking through that door? A bad defense. You know who's walking through that door? Not a great running game. Like, that's what's happening at Alabama right now. But that's kind of why we need a little bit of diversity, and that's why we need guaranteed berths. You know, with the top 6 conference champions. I think that will help a lot in terms of this. Look, I'm excited for a 12-team playoff that's upcoming, and I'm excited. I just want them to do the first 2 rounds on campus. I don't want them to do the second round, the round of 8, at neutral sites. You can rotate the semifinals. You can keep them. You can keep the Rose Bowl there. Whatever you do, I just don't want to. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that. So, Mark Edwards doesn't need any more proof of SEC bias, but I'm in favor of protecting the crescendo of the Big Ten East and the game, which we talked about before. Got to protect those rivalries. I think that's what a lot of these conferences are worrying about right now. You know, the Pac-12, they might have an answer with that because this was their year of going to the top 2 teams of the conference, playing for the conference title. So a lot changing. There's a lot of moving parts right now in college football, and the Big Ten is right at the center of that. I think that'll wrap things up here for tonight. Throat's getting a little dry. Running out of topics. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Big Ten content every single day. Really appreciate those of you who have done that so far. Big time thumbs up to you guys. Twitter is also a place to find me. That's kind of a little bit extra content over there on the Twitter sphere. And make sure when you on the live streams, make sure if you're able to support the channel with a super chat as well. So that'll do it here tonight for Big Ten Ted Live. A lot of action coming up on the channel, so make sure you stay tuned. It's going to be a lot of fun. Michigan and Purdue in the Big Ten championship game. I'll have a preview of that game on Wednesday. Lots of basketball on the channel as well. So until then, I'm Big Ten Ted, and we will see you in the next one.